So the other day I had someone ask me, how do you make black powder out of unicorn horns? And I had to stop and think about that for a second. Just kidding. Hi everybody, this is Garrett. You're watching 11 Bang Bang. Today we are in my messy shop because I've had some people ask for me to elaborate on how I work on wood gun stocks when we are either repairing or building. I've always been a woodworker ever since I was very young. Started out making birdhouses and moved on to cutting boards and whatnot until I was building doors for houses and beds and bed frames and fancy headboards and learning to use router tools and scroll saws and all kinds of stuff. Band saws, I've had all of it. This is my woodworking shop, and one of these days I'll give you a full tour. But today I just want to show you my glue up board, and it is a true glue up board that at the moment is doubling as a powder coating station at the same time. But I will get the lights turned on in here where it's not so bright. I'll bring you up and I'll show you what we're dealing with, and we'll kind of walk through some of the stuff that I use and why I prefer this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to block this light with my head just a little bit. Like I said, this is a bad deal when you just made a video about growing a YouTube channel and not being messy, and here we are out here in my messy shop. But I don't think I've ever brought you out here. Okay, so what are the things you're going to need for restoring wood stocks, building new guns, whatever, or just woodworking on guns in general? And of course, we work with antique firearms, so we use a lot of woodworking stuff because antique firearms, especially American style long rifles, always are cracked, or the wood is a little rotted out and needs replaced in places. Or if we're working on something like this right here, I'm working on an India-made musket with a teak stock. That teak wood it leaves a little bit to be desired sometimes. And so there's a lot of things you can do to really dress it up and make it look a little more authentic. And that's what I'm actually working on right now out here. But I would have to say the most important thing you can have in this situation is the wood glue. This is Titebond 3. This is my go-to wood glue, has been for years, ever since I was younger building cutting boards, because it's actually food safe and it's waterproof, whereas Titebond 2 is water resistant. Titebond 3 is waterproof. In my opinion, this is the best glue there is. Now, it does outdate, and this bottle is about 5 years old, so I'm due for a complete change up in my glue bottle. But yeah, always shake it up. I don't let it freeze out here. But yeah, you're going to have a really good wood glue because guns are under a lot of pressure, especially in the wrist. And if you're going to do any woodworking on them, especially antique firearms, I have to say that Titebond 3 is the best glue. Now, I've heard about Gorilla Glue. I've tried it. It's kind of a glue. You know, you have to soak it with water and bubble it before it will actually work correctly. And I've tried a lot of different glues. I used to use Titebond 2 before I did cutting boards for a long time. And when I got into cutting boards, that's when I got into Titebond 3. And I just never saw a reason to look back. It's a little more expensive, but a bottle like this, especially if you're fixing a gun stock or two, you know, this kind of a bottle will last you for years. I've probably redone 20 gun stocks and a whole lot of other projects with this, and I've only used 2/4 of it, about half of it, and that's been over a 5-year period. So if you're going to have good wood glue, Titebond 3, you have to have wood clamps. Now, these are a little cheap set. I have some better ones over there, but they're buried. I have a big pile of them over there, but this is just a little cheap set. This is wood clamps. You have to clamp wood if you're going to glue it, especially gun stocks, because in order to get the strength that you need, there cannot be any gap whatsoever. These are the little cheap ones you get at the store. You just slide them and then you screw it down like that. There cannot be a gap. You need pressure on that glue to make it work. These are some really good clamps for gun stocks, and these are older than the hills. I got them from my brother-in-law. I don't even know who makes them. They actually used these to help build a house back in the early 19-teens. And this is one of the sets we still have. They have slides, and the springs are still good. But this is good for really long stocks. And it has a slot here for a wood gluing table, which is what I have here, a wood gluing table. A wood gluing table is really nice to have for working on gun stocks. And in a minute, I'll show you what a wood gluing table is. You got your old gun stock, you need to do some repair on it. Maybe it's the kind of situation where you need to strip the entire finish. Now, I'm not saying do this to antique rifles necessarily, but there are some guns where it's imperative that you completely strip the old finish off to do a proper job on the gun. And I like to use acetone for that. There's a few other things you can use, but usually some acetone on that finish, let it soak for a minute, card it off with some Scotch-Brite or something, especially on guns that I'm working on, like these India-made muskets. They come with that shellac that I absolutely hate. And you can do a lot of things with those guns, but you really got to get that shellac off. Acetone sitting on there for a few minutes and then scraping with a card or a Scotch-Brite pad or something, usually bring that right off. You need something like acetone. Also, not for just woodworking, I like to use this when I get an India-made musket because it never fails. The barrels are full of cutting oil and cuttings when you get them, and so when you drill the hole and you go out and try to shoot, and you don't realize just how much oil is still stuck down in that barrel, you can wipe it out with a rag or whatever. I like to take the barrel off. I like to get down there and pour some acetone down inside the barrel, and I will take and I will wipe it and wipe it till there's nothing left, and then go back and apply a good black powder style lubricant. Usually something like Ballistol works pretty good, something that's not going to gum up your black powder. And you don't want to use that oil that's in there because that is some bad stuff for black powder. I can tell you right now, once you get black powder fouling in that oil, it's a nightmare to get it out, and you will always be dealing with sticky barrels after that. So acetone's a good thing to have if you're working on guns, period. This is one of the biggest things that gripes me, and I've had conversations with people about this in the past 2 years. This is an old bottle of Walmart Clean Strip boiled linseed oil. And I had this for years, and I don't always use it on the guns anymore because there's a difference between Walmart Clean Strip, cheap boiled linseed oil, and linseed oil like that you get at the hardware store that's a little higher quality, costs a little bit more. This stuff actually has chemical additives in it. And what those do, you can look it up, but what those do is they cause it to harden quickly. A good linseed oil should take a month a lot of times to set up the correct way. That's how it should be, and a lot of people complain that's not it takes forever to set the finish. Well, you need about a month to correctly set a true boiled linseed oil finish. The additives in it cause it to harden quickly, sometimes within 24 hours. And the trouble I have with that is you should be putting on 10, 15 coats of linseed oil to get the proper finish. When it hardens up that fast because of those additives that are in this, you only get a good 2 or 3 before things start getting hard, and it will no longer accept the oil. And when it seals up and no longer accepts the oil, what you basically have is a polyurethane thin coat on the outside of the gun, and not the true historic oil finish that permeates and soaks into that gun, protecting it far deeper down into the gun, and it requires a lot of time to get that done. So is there any redeeming qualities to this stuff? Yes, there is. One thing I've noticed is on original guns, if you have a nick or a ding or something you really just want to protect, sometimes it's better to apply some of this faster drying finish to it, because if you apply the other kinds of oils that require time and many coats, you can change the color of the finish around it, because not only are you finishing that, usually if you're using your fingers to apply this, guys, use a rag, that's very dangerous. It can combust in a watered up rag, so a lot of people just use their hands to apply this. And if you're using it, you're obviously getting a little bit over on the old finish, and you can change the color of it. So I feel like this is a pretty good protector for small dents and dings on original guns. It'll go in just a little ways, harden and protect, but it won't be a deep protection of the entire gun. That really needs good oil for that. Well, what do I consider a good oil for that? Well, Ethan turned me on to this stuff. This is pure tung oil. It's historic, it's pure, it takes forever to set in there and dry, but with 10-15 coats you can make some really beautiful guns. Go back and check out Ethan's wood runner kit he did with this actual bottle. Even though we've been using it for quite a while, that was a really good job he set up. It took him around a month to set everything into that woods runner, and he did it with this. Now, just because you have oil doesn't mean you're going to get that fine, shiny finish that you see when you go to the artisan shows and the gun fairs and whatnot. In Friendship, Indiana, you're not always going to get that just with the coats of oil, especially after a year or so. So, once this is soaked in, once you know everything's there, and you're wanting to shine it up, what do? Well, some people just spray it down with Ballistol, and that works too. Rub it on the outside of the wood, it won't hurt the wood, and that'll shine it up for a few days. But let's talk about what you really need to shine that gun up to where it's beautiful, a presenter grade piece. And that is some kind of good wood wax. Now what I have here, this is my go-to. This is called Tray Wax, however you want to pronounce it. It's TRE wax. And what it is just a paste wax. Now, I'm going to talk about two different kind of waxes here, and this is the first, because even though it's a little bit expensive, it comes in a big tin and is very good for covering large areas. I also like to take this stuff and bed the inside of the stock on a gun that has, say, pins, like a Brown Bess or a trade gun, something that has pins that holds the barrel into position on an antique flintlock or a percussion lock gun, one of those long rifles. Something you don't want to take the barrel out of very often because you risk damaging the wood. Some of this good paste wax down in there will help a lot. As you fire, the barrel will heat up, it'll melt the wax will settle down into the wood while at the same time coating the bottom of the barrel, preventing rust. At least that's my opinion. I've never heard of anybody else using paste wax besides me. I'm sure somebody else has done it, but over the years that's the conclusion I have come to, and it's worked out pretty well. The wood inside the stock channel, or the barrel channel I should say, always stays moist and oiled, and the underside of the barrel every time you fire and get that barrel warm tends to melt some of that off, and at least for a year, maybe 2 years, you're going to be okay because that's sticking up on there on the bottom side of the barrel, preventing moisture or rust from occurring. And this wax actually works good for metal and wood. And this is just tray wax. I've used Johnson's paste wax in the past, but this is good for covering the gun, polishing it off, waxing it, gun metal, wood, everything. But what about when you really want to shine, when you really want that gun to pop at the very end? After you've taken this stuff and coated the inside and used it in the large areas, don't you want something that will set it off just a little bit more? Well, that is Alfie Shine. And I'd never used this up until recently. This was Ethan's thing alone, and he told me just actually a few weeks ago, and I'd seen what he'd done with it on the Woods Runner and some other stuff. He's like, get that Alfie Shine out and give that a try. And Alfie Shine is 600 years old. The recipe is really, really, really old. And let me see if I can just read what's in this. It contains beeswax, copal, frankincense, myrrh, olive oil, cinnamon oil, and clove oil. And so when you open this up, Ethan put it so eloquently, it smells like Christmas, and your gun will smell pretty good too. And that's a good thing, because sometimes that linseed oil and tung oil, that stuff doesn't smell the best. But this stuff is very expensive, so I don't use it to go down in there. Here, I'll show it to the camera, see what it looks like. I don't use it to line the channel for the barrel or anything like that because it's very expensive and comes in a very small tin. Just a little dab on your finger after you're done with a month's worth of oil coating onto the wood and you've done a wax up job on it. Just a little dab of this on your finger, rub it in and wax it off one more time as the final coat of wax. Trust me, this stuff was used on musical instruments clear back into the Renaissance, and it just leaves them looking beautiful. They smell good, and also has a good hard protective coat after you wax it off, or after you buff it off when you're done. So what else do we have out here? I have bone black. Now this is charcoal, and it's in here because I had to grind it up. And what this is I butchered a steer a couple years ago. I was able to salvage 5 vertebrae out of the spine. I put them in my cooking can that I use to make charcoal for black powder, and I charred them into charcoal, making a bone charcoal. Bone charcoal is used in arts and crafts a lot of times. It's used to make a very fine black finish on a lot of things. And what most gun makers do is they will take this bone black and they'll mix it in with a little bit of tung oil and apply it slowly over a few coats during the whole coating process. And when you do that, you get a very rich black look to your gun. And I'm working on it here. This one's still a little sticky. This is the cut down blanket gun, blown up fusee that Ethan had. I finally got it all back together. It's looking pretty good, but if you look there, you can see I'm not completely done with this. This is just coat number 4, but it's really turned what was, after it was sanded on almost pure white wood, into a black colored wood. And I know the light isn't picking that up very well, but after another 3 or 4 coats of this, this will be almost pure black. If you want to see what it can look like, go check out Turkey Creek 1823's build on his Kibler Southern Mountain Rifle, where he bone blacked that dude to almost pitch black, and it looks beautiful. This is a historic finish, something that was done on a lot of guns. I don't do it on every gun, obviously. There's other things. You can hang Aquafortis and a heat gun. I have that stuff, but it's not in here right now. And a few other things that work really good, but just a slow bone black will turn a stock like this black and age it. Now you don't have to do the whole stock. If you're just looking to antique one of these to make it look old, get some bone black oil on a Q-tip and go in there and hit around the spots that would wear, right here around the lock where your hand would go, places that would wear and show more age than others, especially up here where fire is constantly hitting the wood. Dab that up with a little bone black oil and you will have a really nice looking antiqued stock. So that's what I got going on there. I'm going to grab the camera and flip it around, bring it up here, and I'm going to show you what a woodworking table is, a gluing table. I call it a gluing bench, and why it's important. Okay guys, so we are flipped around here. We are looking at a very sawdusty gluing bench. I need to clean it up. I know, like I said, just made a video the other day saying don't do it. What makes it a gluing bench? Well, in my mind, and these can be used for several things, but I call it a gluing bench. These slots right here, there's also smaller holes along the edge where you can put dowels, and what that's for is you can take something like, I was just showing you this antique, let's say this antique wood clamp here. You can slow it down in there and actually put it right there, and you can clamp down and hold things below it, or you can raise one side like so and still have the other side in the groove, and you can use that to pinch against. And there's all kinds of things you can do with that. You can drive wood down in there and use it as a blocker or a backer, something to screw to. The whole name of the game when it comes to wood gluing is compression, 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 and that's what you need to have, a lot of compression. And that's what those are good for. That's why I call it a gluing bench. I've heard it called a woodworker's bench, several other things over the past, and this one has several other features, but we'll get into that another day. That's pretty well the required things I feel you really need to have to get into refinishing gun stocks, or, you know, don't strip down the patina off of every original gun stock, guys. That's a terrible thing to do. But sometimes they just need a little bit of tender love and care, and sometimes, like, let's look at a few of these glue-up joints in this gun. Now, this gun has 2 notches carved in the stock right here because there's been 2 times this thing has been literally blasted into oblivion and should have never come back from it. The first time was when Ethan struck a snake with it, and yeah, if that looks sticky, that's because I haven't wiped off the excess of that last oil. I like to set it on there for a little while and then wipe it off. But Ethan struck at a rattlesnake with it and blew it away, and we brought it in and we fixed it then. And you can see there's a dowel there. That's an older dowel. And there is a dowel there, and there is a dowel there. And then he took it out and loaded it with 1,200 grains of 4F and 3 round balls and blew it to smithereens again. And now there has a dowel right here, and that was already chipped out and gone, and there's a dowel there. So we are up to 6 dowels in this gun at this point. It's also going to have a rawhide wrap on it when it's done, but this is a very solid glue up. It's been sanded down just a little bit, but for the most part, you know, that's a very solid glue up, and it is going to hold. I mean, the wood glue, especially Type Bond 3, is actually stronger than the original wood, especially on these teak guns. And so it's going to hold up to the absolute best of its ability, I think, especially when we get that rawhide wrap on there. But that's kind of what you're dealing with. That's the kind of breaks I fix. This thing literally looks like Frankenstein if you look around it. Yeah, it literally looks like Frankenstein. So it's got a lot of scars, and it's probably never going to see another 100 grain load because it's just basically held together with pins and glue at this point. But altogether, that glue is going to hold up pretty good and be just fine. They didn't have adhesive like this back in the 18th century or 19th century, so we have a big advantage compared to them. Alright guys, I know I'm a little dirty. I'm filming on a cell phone, and this is not the highest quality video we've ever put out. But, and if you see an old gun stock that might need repaired, before you just throw it out or do away with it, especially if it's an antique gun stock, maybe think about giving her a little glue, maybe a little oil. You might be surprised what you can come up with. As always, trust in God, keep your powder dry. Bye.